to our speaker today. And Mary Brindle, will you please introduce Heidi?
Sure. Heidi Lee is the Race and Equity Coordinator for the City of Edina. She has been on staff for a couple of years, and I've had the pleasure of attending a council retreat where she spent, wow, I want to say she spent a full couple of days with us and talking about just how we can look inside ourselves and get to know ourselves. And in the process, we got to know Heidi. And it's more than I can tell you here. She comes to this position after working in a similar capacity with the St. Paul schools. And I'm just so pleased that she's here. And I can't tell you the effect and the benefits that, as I've talked with city staff, that I hear and see in the work of city staff that have come as a result of having her position at the City of Edina. It adds a level of understanding to staff members, but also you can see it in their work, that it's approached from a perspective of broader understanding of equity. And so I welcome Heidi to the, I'd love to hear what you have to say. Heidi, I'm going to stop this share and you can start your screen share and then control your PowerPoint.
Good morning, everybody. I am excited to be here, and I appreciate just the time that you're willing to share with me this morning, early morning. Just to let you know off the bat, I am not a morning person, so waking up at like 6 o'clock in the morning was a feat, especially working from home nowadays. So I just want to let you know that I appreciate being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So what you should be seeing right now is a picture of City Hall and that it says race and equity. And so my time with you today is to really talk about the legacy of MLK Jr. and really thinking about through his perspective and his speech of the I Have a Dream speech. So really being able to talk about just how we've gotten here, what are some of the things that the city is doing, as well as how are you able to move forward in race and equity work or anti-racist work. So the next slide that I'll be showing is just an introduction, right? So I don't want to start off the presentation without introducing who I am. And so you'll notice that at the very top of the screen, that is a picture of little Heidi with my family. And so to let you know that I am a daughter of two immigrants. My family came here when I was 5 years old from the Philippines. You'll notice that in this background here, where it's kind of like the burnt orange curtains, that is my grandparents' home. My grandparents lived with, or my aunt lived with my grandparents, and this is the home that I'm currently at right now. So really thinking about just that intergenerational, history that I have. So I moved here when I was 5. This was the first home that I lived at. My parents were able to go ahead and have an apartment as well as purchase a home, but then going back to my roots of this being my first home that I lived at when I was in St. Paul. I am, as I said earlier, I am the daughter of two immigrants. My mom, who is a Filipino woman who is strong and sassy. That is where I get some of my characteristics from her. My dad, who is a very, very strong and intelligent man who is very steadfast in his beliefs. And so really thinking about that with my history of who I am, Heidi Lee that you see today is very stemmed in my family. And so along the way, I have a perspective of a Chinese and Filipino woman, having a perspective of a daughter of an immigrant. And so my journey has brought me to Edina, but really thinking about that, I've had experiences working at Capella University through education, as well as being a mentor coordinator in the Boys and Girls Club. And then, as Mary said, working for St. Paul Public Schools in the equity department. So as you can see, a lot of my background is education, and really thinking about that shift from education to working in government setting is that race and equity work is everywhere, right? It's not just in education, but it's really everywhere to be able to provide equity for all. And this is what you'll notice right here is my badge. And that is the very first picture that I took when I worked at EDIDA. So my very first day. And so I love that picture. It's just kind of showing just the history of it. So I am coming up on 2 years in March in EDIDA. And then you'll notice that there's a picture of a Zamboni. That is one of my highlights. In addition to working in EDIDA outside of work, I was able to go ahead and drive a Zamboni. So really, that is one of the reasons why that's important, is because my dad worked in Ramsey County in Parks and Rec. And so he was working in the ice arenas. And when I was growing up, I always wanted to learn how to drive a Zamboni. He told me I was too little. And so as an adult, I've been able to accomplish that. So just to give you a little background of myself and really thinking about what does race and equity work look like to me. And I wanted to start off this presentation of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s, one of his many, many statements that he says is, "I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear." And that is one of the reasons why I do race and equity work, is because there's a level of humanity that's connected to it. Really thinking about that race in the United States has been divisive, but really thinking about how do we bring it back to humanity and start caring and loving for each other. And that's the premise of why I do race and equity work, is that there is a level of humanity. And so when I think about how have we gotten here, I think about this portion of Dr. Martin Luther King's speech in his "I Have a Dream" is, when the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, Black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar of her citizens of color are concerned, right? So thinking, one of the reasons why this resonates with me is really, how did we get here? Because as it states that there is a promissory note where all folks were able to have these opportunities. And so when I think about where we currently are, I think about that there's levels of systems that we have, right? So in here, we have structural system, we have institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. And so these different levels of racism, some folks call it different levels of repression, of how we've gone to this place. So when you think about the different structures that we have, we are, as a society, have different structures. We have education structures, we have healthcare structures that have that provide kind of an interconnectedness of where we're here or why we're here. And so within that bigger structure, we have institutions or organizations. So as I mentioned with the school or the education system, we have schools in there that have their own different policies that have that create barriers and opportunities for folks. And within those different institutions or organizations, we have interpersonal. So we have people, and really thinking about that those people are creating relationships. And within those relationships, as a result of that, there's internalized beliefs. And so as you can see that there is different power dynamics that are occurring within these institutions. And so in a sense, I think of it as a top-down, bottom-up way of how things have been embedded. So thinking about biases, thinking about policies for folks that are structured in systemic racism or in racism. And so that's the current state. The reality of where we are is because there are policies that were based on mental models of how people think about folks of different skin color. And so how do we really think about that we need to move forward? And so when you look at this, I just want to kind of have this as a share out, because I'm not a sit and get kind of person. So when you think about this particular structure, what are some of the things, if I could have one or two people just call out what sticks out for you, whether it's a structural, institutional, interpersonal, or internalized beliefs that have created our systemic racism or racism. Tom?
I think about what's become institutionalized in our criminal justice system, especially with the laws with certain possession and sale of certain controlled substances. I think a lot of times it's been institutionalized to disparingly affect African Americans more so than white people.
This is James.
Hi, James.
The one thing that strikes me about this model is I think of the interpersonal relationships, and what often happens is people have relationships that are beneficial to them, and so they leverage those, and they don't ask one of the questions that Rotarians ask: is it fair to everyone? And so they know it's not fair, but because it benefits them, they continue to propagate those relationships. And then these systems just build on top of each other. And that's how it becomes so structural or systemic, because at every level, there's a level of unfairness for people of color.
And one of the reasons it's really important to understand that with these structures, that power, right? That power and privilege is what keeps that hierarchy. And one of the reasons why I like this graphic is that when people think of racism, they normally gravitate to kind of that extreme of, KKK or all of these things, but really thinking about that there's different levels, right, of how things, the dynamics. And so with this, we're able to see that it's not just my internalized belief. It's really thinking about that there are things that in relationships that I have that have been embedded, as well as the institution and the structural. And so I also give an example of when I was younger, right? Thinking about the fact that when I first came to the US, I hated my name. And just the fact that it was so long. And my name consists of my mom's maiden name, as well as my dad's last name. And my grandparents at the time had that forethought to go ahead and not have or give me an American sounding name, HEIDI, right? So I have not met many Asians named HEIDI, but really thinking about that, they knew that my family and I would eventually come to the US. And so they had that understanding of what does that interpersonal mean when somebody sees the name HEIDI, what power dynamics could be associated with that. And then going into institution, if I did have an Asian like traditional name, which I do have a Chinese name, but how would that be received? What are some of the things that would be tied into that? And then even in that structural piece, right, of, what does that mean when a person sees that my name is HEIDI, as opposed to all of the stereotypes that are connected with an Asian traditional name, right? So they had that forethought of what does that really mean, but not being able to tell me at that age. And so understanding that these power dynamics is how we got here. To understand that folks were promised certain things based on the fact of their rights, but the rights and privileges were in a sense taken away or eliminated because based on mental models of people's association with skin color or what they thought. And so really thinking about that, getting that foundational understanding of the power structure with that is connected to race and oppression. And so when I think about the fact that, that there are all of these different structures, I think about this particular quote from the I Have a Dream speech, which is, now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlight path of racial justice. Now is the time. And so as I think about my role within the city, I think about what are some of the things that the city has done with staff members. And so some of you might have already seen this, but really thinking about that, when you think about the four structures, it's overwhelming, right? The four structures of racism. And so to be able to kind of have race and equity work in the city be at a smaller, more consumable or more kind of, palatable ways to do race and equity work, I've structured it so that there are 3 buckets of work to really look at. So the training, what we've looked at with the 4 systems of the structures of racism, that's part of a training for the staff members. Staff members are able to understand the whole entire system or get an understanding that it's not just the interpersonal relationships that create racism, but it's the institutions and the systems and the structures that we have. And so I am happy to say that staff members will actually be going through race and equity training starting in February. And so they'll be going ahead and looking at the 4 structures or the 4 spheres of structural oppression, as well as getting tools so that they're able to have conversations about race and equity, and for them to really build capacity. And so in 2021, we'll be going ahead and deepening our race and equity training for staff members. We also have a bucket of work, which is work plan. And so with the Race and Equity Task Force, they provided recommendations to the city. And so we are going to keep doing on that work, but also looking at having departments restructure, or not necessarily restructure, but create their own work as it relates to race and equity. And so one of the reasons for that is that we want to be able to have departments decide what their work is, because when there is that decision making, it provides accountability and it provides people to engage in race and equity work and not just be told what to do. And so I think that's important of why we have this work plan bucket. And then the last bucket is really, how do we engage? So being able to have people actively participate in the city's vision of race and equity is really important. And going back to kind of, we want to be able to have people engage in their own way and meet them where they're at. Because I think when folks have a tendency to be told that they are forced to do race and equity work, sometimes there's kind of a battle that comes along with it. And so being able to have engaging opportunities for staff members is also another way for us to start that work in race and equity. And so, as I said, with the training component, we have we will be starting that training. Work plan is something that we've been doing since the Race and Equity Implementation Plan was approved by council. And then that engagement part is also where we've had the stories we share. And I see that Afira, who is a member here, was also one of the folks that shared their story on Better Together. And so that engagement process is not only for staff members, but it's for community members to engage in conversations about race and equity and hear a different perspective that is different from theirs. And so when I think about what work we're doing in the city, I also think about what is the work that I can do individually. And so with this particular quote that was part of Dr. Martin Luther King's speech is, "This is our hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, and to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day," right? The last part sticks out for me, is to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. And so as I think about what does that look like, I think about that with race and equity work, or as anti-racism work, folks, is really a lot of people want to do. We want to get into action mode to be able to kind of fix it or eliminate it. And so these are the things that I think about when how do we move forward in race and equity work? It's to listen, learn, and lead. And listen, learn, and lead is, kind of how do we become vulnerable enough to know that there is a different perspective. With that listening portion, it's that willingness to hear a different perspective than your own, and listen to understand. And one of the reasons why I wrote "Listen to Understand" is that being able to have a conversation and just being present in the moment rather than wanting to fix it. As I wrote down, some of the things that you wrote as far as your 4 points of 4 ways of Rotary. One of the things that stuck out is, does it build goodwill and better friendships, right? So that willingness to be able to create a relationship so that you can understand. And with all of these things within listen, learn, and lead, it's not necessarily something huge, right? An example of being able to listen is listening to a podcast about race that may be different from yours. And I think that's one of the things too, when people think about racist or anti-racist work, is that what can I do? I am just one individual. But it's being able to hear a different perspective and build on that, what you've listened, and then thinking about what you've learned. Because as I know within the city of Edina, really thinking about the racial demographics, right? Knowing that it's about 87%, it might change a little bit, but 87% white folks. And thinking about where are there different perspectives that folks need to hear. So part of my role is to listen, to see where people are at, and how do I, grow or broaden my perspective, because I only have one perspective as an Asian woman. I don't know the other perspectives that are coming from the community. Another point of how do we move forward is really learning. Having that broad spectrum of hearing different voices, hearing Black, Indigenous, people of color perspectives that you might not hear, and being able to reflect. That's huge in itself. To be able to know how your experiences, how your personal, professional experiences impact the way that you have these views. And so an example of that is having a conversation with a BIPOC person. BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, people of color. I know sometimes being able to have a conversation and learn from someone that does not have that same thought process or that same perspective might be hard, but it's really just being able to be vulnerable. And then the last, how do we move forward, is leading. Partnering with organizations that empower or are involved in race and equity work, and building allyship with BIPOC people as well as communities. And one of the reasons why I put building allyship is that I think allyship is a verb, and it's not just a noun. And so there's been conversations within the community of the race and equity community of, is it being an ally or building allyship? Allyship is an active engagement in being able to dismantle racist and oppressive systems. And so that is where that foundation of anti-racist work is to be able to actively engage. When I think of just allies in itself, is that yes, you're supporting the work, but building that allyship is that constant engagement in that. And so an example of being able to lead in anti-racist work or race and equity work is to help amplify voices from organizations, amplify BIPOC voices that you might hear, and really being able to lead and be courageous when you hear that something is not right, and being courageous to do things that may not be the norm. And so that is a very high level way to think about how to move in anti-racist work, but anti-racist work is not always big and grand. It's sometimes taking a step back and saying, what do I need to learn? And going back to your 4 tenets, right, of Rotary work, is this fair? How do you have a perspective of what's being fair if you haven't had opportunities to learn from other folks where their perspective is different? Does being able to is the truth, right? How do you find the truth when you have not had a broad spectrum of perspectives? So really thinking about that, when I saw the 4 tenets of Rotary, it definitely connected to me of how does race and equity work connect to Rotary work? And so just being able to build off that. And so when I think of just where do we move forward, right? I think about just this last piece is darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And so being able to go back to kind of that first quote that I provided you is that race and equity work for me is out of love. It's out of humanity. And so how do you find that humanity in folks? Because with racism, it has created a division. But in able to dismantle racism, we have to be able to bring back humanity, which is that love for folks. And so with that, that is the end of my slide deck. I have provided my email as well as my phone number here if you have any questions, but I will stop sharing my screen to take questions if folks have any.
All right. Well, we do have some questions
Okay.
in the chat that we'll start with, and then any additional questions. So Nick Andrews from Hennepin County, when you had the four ovals up, institutional, et cetera, he wrote that we need equity programs to diversify hiring practices in large institutions when you were asking for feedback from the group. He brought that up. So I thought I would put that in so that you can react to that. He is in a position where at the library where he has staff working for him.
Yeah, I think I definitely do agree where there is a need to have equity programs to diversify like hiring practice. One of the things that as a perspective for me, when I think about that overall goal, which I think a lot of organizations have to be able to diversify their working staff, is questions that are, if you do hire a person of color, are you ready to support them? Right. So the questions that I've always had when I have met with human resources is, yes, it's great that you want to be able to diversify your staff members, but really thinking about hiring is easy, right? Being able to have folks stay after a year in that retention piece is key as well, because that speaks volumes of the culture that's been created in your organization. And so really, what are the next steps? Because we can have a certain goal to be able to diversify, but we also need that retention piece. And what does career pathing look like? And so that in itself, there's multitude steps that we need to think about too in diversifying, especially not just in Edina, but other organizations.
Sure. And how do you identify racism in systems or organizations around you?
I think I know that the city before I joined went through the GARE model. And so a lot of their philosophies with the decision-making process is really some of the things that I do. So it's asking with these things that we want to implement, who benefits from this, right? Does it create additional barriers? And I know that sometimes with race and equity work, where it is intentional work, there's sometimes a pause, and that pause allows people to ask these questions, right? Because I am not necessarily coming into a space and saying, this is, there's this work that needs to be done, or there's certain gaps, things will come up. And so it's just having that conversation to be able to say there's a gap, or this is creating barriers for folks.
Sure. And what kind of pushback, if any, have you received? in your work in Edina?
I think that a lot of it is because the work, race and equity work is so overwhelming. Of how do we, do we have the time to do this? Do we have the resources to be able to do this? Do we have, is it going to be sustainable? I think that for me has been my pushback when certain things have been brought up to me of, can we do this right now? Are we able to maintain this where the work that we're doing is sustainable and not performative? Because I think that folks do, as I said earlier, want to do race and equity work, whether it's creating systems, but is the system that we've created, that process, going to have longevity? And is it going to have the results that we want? Because people, there's an association that we want to go ahead and fix things, but not really looking at how do we assess that this has been a tangible, these results that we're getting are tangible, and these results that we're getting are what is the right thing to do or the fair thing to do.
Sure. And I know that with the help of the Edina Community Foundation, there is a community conversation starting and getting people organized in helping the community be able to learn to talk about race, to begin to discover for themselves what is the first step for people. And as part of our club's continuing effort, what are some of the things, can you give us a few instances of institutional racism that our club can take a look at and start learning about in order to highlight and help remove?
That's a really tough question because I think that there's many institutional things that have been set in place. I know with the killing of George Floyd, a lot of folks have wanted to take a look at what is the police training, or in what ways the use of force policy. And one of the things that I think about too is really looking at where are we within our sphere, right, of those 4 spheres. Is there change that can be done? Is there smaller institutional things that can be eliminated? So, it's hard to be able to say what are tangible things for folks to work on. I think it's being able to say, looking at where your current membership is, like that could be something, right? Like where it's like, where are there opportunities for memberships to grow? Where are there opportunities to be able to have, folks be able to participate? Is kind of the things that I look at, especially going back into, working in the St. Paul School District of institutions are also like a microcosm or smaller of like a classroom. And so some of the work that I did within the school district is looking at what is the process that an educator would call on students. Is it being able to see what that trend pattern looks like? And then changing it. So some of the smaller changes that some of educators have put in place is having like call sticks, right? Those little popsicle sticks, and they'd have them in a jar, and they pick out a name, and making sure that all students had the opportunity throughout the day to like speak or voice their perspective, as opposed to going ahead and calling on that student that raises their hand all the time, right? And so what ways are there policies in place where it's creating barriers for folks to participate? And that in itself is an institutional way to be able to eliminate disparities. So it's really within what is within your club that you want to focus on.
Sure. I think the last question, what is the diversity percentage on city staff? And I guess included with that, how has your position on city staff affected Edina's hiring practices?
So the last time I looked, it was about 3 to 4% BIPOC staff members in the city. And so really thinking about how within the race and equity implementation plan that they wanted to have it where there was a diversification of that, and really thinking about how to be able to mirror Hennepin County. And so we are nowhere near mirroring what Hennepin County's demographics look like, but really thinking about how do we start making those hiring practices to mirror the city of Edina. And so even looking at that conversation is we're not able to control who applies for positions in the city. However, we are able to control where those marketing or where the promotion is. And so some of the things that have occurred is staff members from human resources are looking at where are they advertising? Are they being able to go ahead and show that race and equity components, cultural diversity is a priority within that work. So some of the things that have occurred is that a saying on the job descriptions that we're looking for folks that may speak a different language. The person that has multi-language skills, also having a race and equity component on the job description. And then also really looking at how do we ensure that once staff members the interview process, how are we ensuring that there is a question asking folks about what their experience is with race and equity. And then being able to say, yep, now we've hired them, how do we support them? And so in my time, I've been able to sit on different panels and be able to have those questions with hiring managers with this person that you want to hire, what are the benefits? With this person that you want to hire, how are you going to be able to support them? Because that's key in itself. And so, one of the things that I have also done is when there has been a BIPOC person that has been hired, I do reach out to them and just, say hello, welcome to the city. Because I think for me, as that resonates, because when I first walked into the city of Edina, I was looking to see where other BIPOC folks were. Right. And so be able to build that community is key for a person wanting to stay and work for the longevity of their career.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Heidi. And I'm going to see if I can share my screen here and go back to the in the PowerPoint today. Let's see here. In the PowerPoint from the meeting today was our 4-way test, which I am very clumsy in trying to get back up here. But
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for recognizing the importance of the 4-way test to each of us as Rotarians, and then bringing that into your presentation. You're amazing and doing amazing work, which benefits us all, no matter how we fit into the city structure of Edina. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I appreciate your time.
So thank you, Heidi, so much. Wow, what an incredible presentation. We really appreciate it. I know that as we continue to open up and focus on these types of issues within our society, we can't help but gain more understanding and start changing some behaviors little by little. As you said, one step at a time, every little bit helps in doing so. So we thank you so much, and thank you so much for being a part of the city of Edina. What a great asset you are to us here and within the city, as is James. James, thank you again for coming today as well. And Nick and all of our other members who came to the meeting today, we appreciate you as well. So, all right. And I asked Mary to just share the 4-way test because it was brought up a few times today and how important it is to us. So as I send us all off, I want to say that, but then also remember, next week, Chip Rankin with Minnewaska Area School will be our speaker. He is also a Minnesota National Guard member. So more to come, but please come next week. It'll be a great presentation. So let's all just unmute ourselves and we're going to finish with the 4-way test for a second time. All right. The 4-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Number 1, is it the truth?
Truth.
Number 2, is it fair to
fair
all
to all
concerned?
concerned?
All concerned.
3, will it build goodwill and better
Goodwill,
friendships? And 4,
Will it be beneficial to all
Beneficial
concerned?
concerned.
All right, you guys, God bless you. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week. I will be transformed into Mrs. Rose. Great day, you guys.
Congratulations,
All
Margaret.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.